Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Thrashers Paradise. Today I am joined with Jeff. He is a member of Illyrian.
Hey, Colin.
Did I say it right?
You did. Congratulations. You did it.
God.
It only took us like 20 minutes in pre to get to this point, but we got here eventually.
Yes. Thank God. I had to relearn the English language to be able to do this interview.
Yeah, that probably comes up a little bit.
Yeah, you think, well, Illyrian came out with an album last year called The Entity Unknown. And your first album came out in 2016, Round 2, Fight. Now,
right.
As a member of the band, what for you was the biggest difference between both albums?
Sure. So quite a bit of difference. With Round 2 Fight, that was actually, Illyrian had been known under another name before that as Hellborn Death Engines. I wasn't in the band at that point, but they did put out a record, under that name. And so Round 2 Fight, even though it's the first Illyrian record, the name is kind of symbolic of, that second phase of trying things again. Round 2, I wasn't as involved on the creative front with. I was still a new member of the band. A lot of the music had already been written when I came into the band, so I kind of showed up to fill in on the bass parts. Was still very much finding my role within the band, and so Entity for me is much more near and dear to my heart. I was a lot more involved in the creative process. Most of the lyrics you hear on that album are written by me. I actually started singing on that album. I hadn't done any kind of singing prior to that. A big one for us is we were down a member between Round 2 and Entity Unknown. We had a guitarist that left the band, and a lot of the music that was written initially for Entity was kind of, he was half of the writing team. So initially Entity was actually, twice its length. But when he departed the band, we let him keep his IP. We weren't going to use his music without him. So that kind of radically narrowed our scope into what ended up being the final product. And I think that it really kind of speaks to the direction we're wanting to move in. I think we were still kind of figuring out how each other worked, and we had to, figure out how to record an album as a 3-piece when we're typically a 4-piece band. But I'm very happy with the result of it. Like I said, I was much more involved in the creative process, so I feel a lot closer to Entity as opposed to Round 2.
So how long did it take you to find that fourth member?
Over a year, actually. Yeah, it was quite a long time. We went into it knowing we wanted to be pretty particular with our audition process. We figured we'd rather be stern with people up front as opposed to having to take somebody on and then say 3 or 4 months down the road it wasn't really working out. So we had a lot of phenomenal musicians come through the space, a lot of really great people that we got to meet, and Kelly, who we ended up taking in the end, we actually met at one of our shows in November of last year. She was a member of the crowd. We were playing with a standing guitarist at the time, Torian Chadlich from Hazard and Traveler, who was a godsend for us during the summer of 2019. We would not have made it without that guy, so major props to Torian. So Kelly had seen us a few times, and we got chatting after the show, and she said, "Congratulations on taking Torian. That's sweet that you guys found another guitar player. That's excellent. I'm happy for you." And we're like, "Oh no, Torian's just filling in for us. We're still actually actively looking." And so that conversation turned into, turns out she's a guitar player and she'd been following us for a while. And so we said, "Yeah, try out, see what happens." We're happy to have anybody in the space. And it really worked from there. She came in for that initial audition where we had her learn a couple of our tracks. We went out for a drink prior to that for kind of the personality test, and she walked out of that jam space, and the three of us looked at each other. We're like, yeah, and that one, yeah. That was the first person that all three of us had unanimously yep, that's the one. We should go for her. So she joined us in November after over a year of playing as a 3-piece, writing as a 3-piece and performing as a 3-piece with Torian helping us out on the second guitar there.
Awesome. Now, a video I've seen from your social media that I just thought was absolutely legendary was the Full House.
Oh yeah.
The Full House video. What made you all collectively as a band want to create that funny little video?
I think that was Scott's idea. We had seen, I think it was a Vine of a guy who's doing a kind of a mock-up of that exact thing, and he's doing all these hilarious things, opening the fridge and stuff. So he's like putting a cat in the oven. You've probably seen the video. That was honestly the creative impetus for it all. We saw that. We said that's hilarious. We could probably do something like that pretty easily. Yeah, it ended up being not a lot of work to get it done, and did really well for us for a performance perspective. And I think it's hilarious as well. I think that's one of the best ideas Scott's ever had.
Awesome. Now, you guys are from the Calgary metal scene, which from what I've heard of and from what bands I've interviewed, is a very good scene out there. There's a lot of good, promising bands coming from that scene. Is it hard to kind of make a name for yourselves out there?
I wouldn't say, I don't want to use the word hard necessarily. Like, obviously, every musician in the scene does work very hard, and you definitely have to put in your due diligence to, start being recognizable in the scene. I think for a lot of scenes, and Calgary's no different, a lot of it comes down to being present in the scene, not just as performers, but also as spectators, as supporters of other bands. It's like one big family in the metal scene. Everybody kind of knows each other. So a lot of it is just kind of putting in the time, being transparent, like making sure that you show up. I think that there's a lot of really talented bands around here as well, and that really drives bands to perfect and hone their craft. To really, show up and give it 110% when they do get on stage, because if they don't do that, like, you're just going to get blown out of the water by the next 4 great bands that you're playing with that night, right? So I think to stand out, you really got to go the extra mile, and that goes for most music scenes. But I've been in the Calgary metal scene in one way or another for about 10 years now, and things feel very different to me these days, in a very good way. Like, I remember for a long time there wasn't a lot of shows going on, or people were kind of being weird and cliquey about things. And over the last, I'd say, probably 3 to 5 years, things have really changed. And now, everybody's friends with everybody. Promoters seem to be working with each other a little more closely. There's more opportunities in general. There's more people coming out to shows, more people likely to buy merchandise and support you guys. So overall, I think it's a very cooperative scene, which is very nice, and the competition that exists is friendly in nature, and I think that's very good for creative arts such as music.
Awesome. Now, from what I've known, the Calgary, the Edmonton, and the Vancouver scenes of metal are all very close and knit, and they're all 3 areas that are constantly touring around, always making sure to get their establishment between the 2 provinces. Why do you feel that's the case?
I think a lot of that has to do with they're just geographically the 3 most populated areas that we can get to pretty easily without going across the border. And going across the border obviously presents its own challenges as artists. Vancouver in particular has a hell of a metal scene. I think they have the most people definitely between Calgary and Edmonton and Vancouver, so that probably counts for something. But between the 3, from my perspective, it seems like Vancouver is the most active, and so it's a natural state. Especially for the Vancouver bands, like, they can go to Victoria, but it's the ocean for however long after that, and so they got to come this way. By extension, they don't really have anywhere else to go. And for us, it's like, Calgary to Edmonton, obviously that's just a 3-hour drive. So we play a lot of shows in Edmonton as well as Calgary. And then Vancouver is quite a haul for us. It's about 14 hours between Calgary and Vancouver. But because the scene is so bustling in Vancouver, because the scene is so good in Calgary and Edmonton, I think it's just naturally where we end up gravitating to. And then with Canada just being as large as it is, like, if you go east, you hit one town, 11 hours out, and then it's another 11 hours to get to the next place. Like, it's an insane amount of space between places. So So doing, Calgary to Edmonton to Vancouver, there's a lot of places you can hit in between those spots. So I think that's why that ends up being the case. Yeah, honestly, I think it's just geography.
Awesome, because I've always been curious about that. It never dawned on me to ask anyone that question till we started talking. It's just like, wait.
What is this game? Yeah, like we'd love to play out east, but it's like a 3 fucking day drive to get out to Ontario. Like
fair enough. No, I understand that, man.
Yeah,
it's a mission just to get here.
Yeah, exactly. So we'd still like to do it. Like it is on our list to do, a lot of Toronto, a lot of Quebec in that area. But again, it's the infrastructure, the amount of time, the amount of money you need to get out there. Like you really got to make sure you're walking into a winning hand, because you could very quickly lose money, and that's nothing sours musicians faster than just bleeding money. So
exactly. And if you ever do decide to come to Southern Ontario, I recommend going to Kitchener, Ontario. That is the hotbed for metal.
Kitchener, no shit. My grandmother lived in Kitchener, so like I'm quite familiar with Kitchener. I would not have thought that about Kitchener, Ontario. I'll be honest.
Oh no, there's a lot of good bands from there. There's bands Invicta, Raider, Cathartic Demise, APOC, just to name some. They all came from there.
A bustling little scene then. Good. Good to know.
Yeah. So back on track to the interview. The one thing I love most about the Entity Unknown is the album cover artwork. It's beautiful. It's a nice display of red and purple coloring. The logo just pops out in that gold font. What made the band collectively want to agree on this album artwork?
Sure. So a couple things with this. I think this is a good time to talk about our artist, a fellow named Joshua Bellinger, who's a tattoo artist out of the United States. Josh and we and Josh have been working together pretty much since the Hellborn days. Actually, he was the guy that did the original Hellborn Death Engines album cover art, and people really resonated with that art. They really responded to it in a positive way. So we very early on said, we want this guy to be the visual component of our audio offering, as it were. So all the art that you see on our merchandise, on our website, on our albums, it's all this guy. We've never met Josh in person, but we have a great relationship with him. We've done a lot of business with him over the years. Highly recommend that guy. So he's got a very signature comic book style, as I'm sure you've noticed from that. And a big mantra of ours in Illyrian is to kind of not make our lyrical content so serious. We kind of feel like that melodramatic shtick has been done quite a lot in the metal scene, as it were already. We kind of want to just have more fun with it, right? So a lot of our narrative with our lyrics is, about comic books or about video games or just something that's escapism in general. So we feel Josh really captures that. Where that one in particular, the Entity, comes from, there is a track on Entity Unknown. I don't know if you're a video game player, but the song in question is called Grant Us Eyes, and it's about the video game Bloodborne. And if you've played Bloodborne, and spoilers for those watching that haven't played Bloodborne and want to play it someday, skip ahead 2 minutes here. Something happens in the game, and you suddenly realize that there's these giant, spidery, alien-like creatures just hanging out on all the buildings all around you. And they've been there the whole time. You couldn't perceive them. It's very Lovecraftian in nature. And so that creature was the source material for the album cover. We had wanted to call it the Entity Unknown. That's kind of Lovecraftian in nature. That a lot of the themes on this album are about kind of monsters or something terrifying. And so I sent that to Josh and said, we're looking for something in this vein. And actually his original concept, when he sent it back to me, it looked too much like one of these creatures. And I was like, no, I don't want to get sued. Like, take creative inspiration, but let's not rip it off verbatim. So even though that song Grant Us Eyes isn't the title track of the album cover actually is quite related in terms of the source material to that. And actually, as of this week, we're doing pre-orders for a run of ladies tank tops where Josh actually redid the monster design and put the logo in a different place. He did the work specifically for this. So we actually haven't had that monster on any of our merchandise until this week. So if you're watching this and you're a lady and you want a tank top, boy, have I got a deal for you. Self-plug.
Hey, you have to. This is the perfect opportunity, man.
I got exactly one opportunity to do this.
And I'd be dumb to neglect the fact that we are during a very hard time in our country, the COVID-19 pandemic. As a musician and as a member of, damn it, Illyrian.
We'll just cut that. That's fine. That's
I'll specifically cut that part. As a musician and a member of Illyrian, how hard is it to not be able to book a tour or even just get out there to perform and get together with the bandmates?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is impacting everybody in a different way on a global scale, and I think the art scene in particular is being impacted in an interesting way. On the one hand, we live in a fortunate age of technology where creating music is a very technical process, so you can do a lot, on your own if you have the right gear, if you have the right smarts to do that. But it's hard not to address the elephant in the room that there isn't really much revenue to be generated when you can't play shows, when you can, those are big places where we can push merchandise, where those that we don't make money on the music unless you're performing the music in some capacity, at least at somebody at our level, right? So that's hard, and you hear about people are projecting maybe 2021 is the next time tours are going to be booked, and that feels like a long way off. That's nearly a year of not generating revenue in a conventional sense, and so that can be scary. But from a creative perspective, I think we're doing pretty okay. We have the technology to keep collaborating together. There have been some growing pains, organically we haven't done music this way. We've done it, in a space together and worked at it from there. So having to do things kind of in a vacuum and isolation from each other is interesting. We are actually hard at work on the EP right now. We decided we wanted to do an EP for a few reasons, and this was decided before COVID entered the scene. One of which was, with Kelly's introduction into the band, she's very much rooted in death metal, and we have death metal in our tendencies, but we're kind of all rooted in thrash, especially Scott, who is the primary writer of the band. So we decided, after she joined, a few things, one of which is we're changing the tuning that we're playing in. So we had typically played in standard, which is not super conventional for metal. We're now going down to D standard, so a full step down. And that actually quite radically changes the music itself. Even going back and playing our old material now in D, they feel like very different songs. So we wanted to kind of experiment. Instead of doing a full new album with this new sound, we wanted to just try something a little shorter, kind of to get our feet wet. There's a surprising amount of work that goes into rejigging your creative content when you do something like change your tuning that drastically. The other thing is we have been exploring doing stuff in a digital release format. A lot of the modern music landscape with companies like Spotify doing as well as they have, it's becoming increasingly less about putting out an album and having that album do very well. It's now kind of turned into this culture of having a single that does very well, or it's kind of less about these huge lump sum drops of content and more about spreading out and being consistently present to get engagement from people. So we wanted to kind of try some things in that world and put out a smaller release that we could release in single individual tracks. Just try some new ways of PR, some new ways of approaching our distribution model for our music. So for us, it's been a lot of these are kind of theoretical things that we want to try putting into some sort of context. We felt an EP, specifically a digital EP for a free release, would check a lot of these boxes. So So we've been still working on that, and actually I'm happy to report that musically it's done. We are now at a point that we're looking at getting into pre-production quite quickly. And pre-production, when you can't get into a room together, is quite interesting. It's, recording is in essence, you do things isolated from each other and you put them together, but just kind of, mastering those technical gaps, particularly when it comes to like recording drums, for instance. Recording drums is quite an involved process at a technical level. And we can kind of BS our way around it, but that's not really how we like to do things. We're very big believers in doing pre-prod properly and then sitting and digesting the music to give it, some time in the oven, as it were, to really get to that final form we want to put out there. So we're now not so much struggling with the creative aspect as much as the, I'll use the word practical aspect of getting that all together. So that's a work in progress. Obviously this is a weird situation for anybody, and bands are no different on that. So we're just trying to roll with the punches and keep busy, and we really don't want to fall behind or lose motivation or lose focus. It's just we got to be, we got to stick together through this, right? So it's been interesting, and I'm sure it's going to continue to be interesting.
Exactly. Now a lot of bands, from what I've seen, have been doing either live stream concerts, just live streams in general, or even live stream Q&As. Could we see Illyrian do that potentially?
Yeah, I think there's a strong possibility if we figure out our technical hurdles. That is something we might explore, especially if this goes on for another 6 months. Like at a certain point, we have to do what we can to, stay on people's speeds, stay kind of in those spheres, right? But at the moment, we haven't quite figured out how to do that to a level that we would be happy with, at least, right? Like we could do it on our phones. We could kind of half-ass it. Again, we're not really interested in doing that. We'd rather take the time to work on our things creatively, kind of incubate a little bit, and then when things aren't like this, hopefully we can kind of hit the ground running. But more and more, that is something that's coming into our conversations. So yeah, at the moment TBD, but it's something we are highly considering.
Excellent. And one last question for you. We ask this to every guest if I can speak English. We ask this question to every guest that does come on our channel to ensure that we're talking to true metalheads and not just some random person we met 5 minutes ago over an internet chat group, if they even still exist. So, we call it a poser question. The question is simple: who would win in a fight, Lemmy or God?
Obviously Lemmy.
And that is correct, good sir. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on Thrashers Paradise today. Is there anything you'd like to say to the audience watching this at home?
Yeah, for sure. You know what? Stay safe out there. Stay sane. Make good choices, or don't, because I'm not your real dad. And fucking Slayer.
There we go. That is how you end the video. Thank you so much. Until next time, keep on thrashing.
Keep on thrashing.